All right, folks. He is here, the man who needs no introduction. It is the one and only Matthew Arrett. You can find him over on CanadianPatriot.org, at CanadianPatriot.org, RisingTideFoundation.net. Make sure you get over there and get his books. It's so vital for you to understand the framework, the history, the context, the backdrop, and the theater to know where you are and where we are headed as a country and as Western civilization implodes. Matthew Arrett's work is the magnum opus of all things geopolitical, geostrategic. With that being said, Monsieur Arrett, c'est la vie.
C'est la vie. C'est la vie. Hey. How's it going, man?
Good, buddy. How are you?
I'm okay. We actually, my wife and I, we just hosted an event in Montreal. First time we did a physical event with a physical live audience in Montreal since this whole COVID thing began. So it was nice. It was nice to get out of the house, get off the Zoom a little bit, actually speak to real human beings.
So you're saying that I'm not a real human being because all you've done is talk to me on Zoom.
Oh, you got me. But
I'm sad now.
V. No, I believe you. I believe in you. I believe you're out there.
I am real. I'm really not an avatar of a monkey talking. I'm not an artificial intelligence.
All right, I have faith that somewhere out there is a human body occupying space.
There is. I am real.
You're not AI.
No,
you're not.
At least not yet.
Unless this is all a big fiction of our imagination, and we are all just little avatars being played by a giant video game by a interdimensional alien child playing his PS83 in another dimension, and we are just avatars entertaining the kid.
I think that is what it is. I mean, and this is why they are infiltrating our world, and we must believe our government when our government says that they have extraterrestrial entities and extraterrestrial vehicles and non-human intelligences and recover their bodies. We have to believe them because our government never lies. They're always truthful, especially a government whose entire existence is based on fiction, is based on subversion, is based on subterfuge. We need to believe them, right, Matt?
Absolutely. This is a perfect gateway because this is both what we talked about at our meeting this weekend in Montreal, and since most people who are listening now were not able to physically be there, I figured I wanted to just go through some of the issues of the UFO cult and the psyop that we're all living through right now. I was just reading. There was I think it's Ipsos Reid or who wrote the polls? At Newsweek. Let me see here. It was. It was Ipsos Reid pointed out that nowadays 42% of Americans fully believe in UFOs. The amount of Americans who identify with believing in any type of God is down to far less than half of Americans. The spike both towards believing in UFOs and the decrease in faith in any kind of God, the creator, it's an inverse proportion. As one goes up, the other one has gone down proportionally over the past 30 years. And that's probably not a coincidence. That we all do need something ultimately as a species that yearns for meaning and truth, and we need to have faith in something beyond the limitations of our existence. That's a fundamental yearning of the soul, just like the body needs water and food and sleep, and to maintain itself. The soul also needs faith as a real food. But the question is, who controls the conditions upon which that faith that animates and shapes the spiritual identities of a society is going to be based? Because you can have like rational faith built upon a firm foundation, or you can have a blind faith, irrational faith that you just hold on to because you need to believe in something, but that has shaky foundations. So the fact that much of the messaging in the video games that we play, in the films that we watch, when you go to Netflix or Amazon Prime, the amount of subtle manipulation and scenarios that involve exactly the type of stupid shit that I said that makes people think that they're really profound because they've just thought maybe this is all a giant dream or an artificial construct, like I'm in the Matrix, and I'm just a brain floating in some liquid, vial in the future or in some other dimension, or maybe I am being played by aliens who just created me as a synthetic self-aware AI construct in what I would think to be the future. All of these things, people think, wow, that's so profound of a thought. And it's like, no, that is placed there in our movies, in our films, in the fiction books that are popularized in the monopolized bookstores that have completely replaced 30 years ago in North America. There were far more small mom and pop bookstores, used bookstores. Those are mostly gone. They've been annihilated for these big behemoths of Barnes and Noble or Chapters Indigo, which, by the way, in Canada, the Barnes and Noble of Canada is Chapters Indigo, which has a near monopoly on all acceptable literature that's going to be published and consumed by people who want to read books. That's still, though it's a dying breed, it's still out there. People are always have that yearning to want to read a book. The woman who runs it, Heather something, co-hosted the 2006 Bilderberger Summit in Canada. So just to say, like, there are political agendas always shaping what is popular in a sick society. So if you fall into a society that becomes captured by imperialists and sociopaths, there's a good chance that the type of culture, the music, the video games, everything else that we use to entertain ourselves will probably have a trace or an aspect of those agendas that want to transform us as a species to serve some politically desirable outcome, as far as what type of cultural matrix, religious matrix are people expected to live in. Now, I prepared a few slides during my presentation, and for today's presentation, I want to show it, but I'm having a bit of trouble with the screen share, so we might not be able to do too much of that. Sad. However,
oh no,
I'll try to do what I can. There's one thing I want to show people. You've probably seen this from the World Economic Forum website. Klaus Schwab releases The Great Narrative.
Yes.
As
The Great Narrative. What happened to the Great Reset? Or has it always been a narrative?
Well, it's the film sequel, as they say, the sequel to The Great Reset, because we need new organizing mythologies. And so part of it is that a lot of the people, because of the old mythologies that are tainted with, like, beliefs in family and male, female genders, or God, or Judeo-Christian values of morality, because of the lingering hold that some of these old obsolete narratives have on us that were created 2,000 years ago with the death of Christ, the birth of Christ. Because of that, we need a new set of narratives that would cause people to not want to resist the Great Reset. So the Great Reset obviously calls for eating bugs, devaluating the role of human life, by promoting mass euthanasia, mass access to drugs, lower access to abundant energy by shutting down viable nuclear or hydrocarbon energy. So those are the sorts of things that are going to kill a lot of people, especially our children and the weak. So normal human beings, animated by those old obsolete mythologies, the narratives of the past, would normally be inclined to want to resist. So to get rid of the great resist that would occur, we needed new great narratives, new great stories to shape new religious self-descriptions of where we came from, why we are, what's the purpose and things. One of those it's important to keep in mind is that the Great Reset itself is not a Klaus Schwab project specifically. It was actually inaugurated and made public by Prince Charles in June 2020 as an outgrowth of the British High Command. So Prince Charles is the nominal figure who was selected to usher in this Great Reset, now King Charles. King Charles is somebody who, at his last coronation, I don't know if you can see my screen still.
Yes.
When he's coronated to be the king, there was a big hullabaloo because there was a UFO at his coronation, which drove the
Are you still showing the Klaus Schwab one, or you pulled up another screen?
Oh, I am showing the Klaus Schwab one. Yeah, I moved to King Charles.
Okay, so on the screen share, there's a tab that says share this now, or share this tab. If not, you could take this one off, like remove this one and then do another screen share.
Oh, I see. I got
present the screen again. There you go. There we go. Bingo.
There we go.
Okay, bam.
Okay.
Oh my God, it's
There
a
we are.
UFO. That means he's the anointed.
All right, so this is New York Post. Yes. Take it as you want. People did run in that direction. That they did see this, because increasingly there's this idea that if the governments of the world have been withholding and suppressing intercommunications that these government high officials have had with aliens from other galaxies, or it wouldn't have just been necessarily the last 80 years. But what's implicit is that, well, if these beings traveled, faster than the speed of light to get here, it's likely the case that they've been here since the dawn of humankind. And, there's a lot of theories, like in the movie Prometheus, another Hollywood movie with Ridley Scott. But there's a lot of these stories as well that try to repackage the human origin story as having been the consequence of some hybrid infusion of alien DNA with monkey DNA, which accounts for why, you don't seem to have this gradient of transitions of the species in the fossil records from monkeys to humans. And so these discontinuous leaps, they say, well, because Darwinism doesn't account for that, the only way to account for that is aliens must have made it. Of course, the question then becomes, well, who made the aliens? Under what conditions on their home planet did such a species evolve, or whatever? Was it another alien species from another planet that went and seeded them with some proto green monkey species that were then creating other aliens? And what about that species? Was that created by another alien species? So you have effectively, for the same sort of problem that encountered the lame, unrigorous theologians, the simple-minded theologians who tried to portray the idea that everything that we have was created by God, who exists. So all space and time and matter was created by God. And I believe in God, but there's a very naive, stupid way of doing this that's very in alignment with what I just said about the stupidity about the aliens creating us. Is that, well, then if that God existed in space and time, then what created that God who exists in space and time? Is some big bearded guy? Was it some other God earlier on that created him? And then what created that God? Was it some earlier God that created that God? And it goes on forever. And you get into this absurdity, whereas there's another way of thinking, or another paradigm that would help resolve this in a more simple manner, but it requires a little bit more mental rigor. But Prince Charles, now King Charles, here, I'll do a stop sharing for a second. I'm going to try to share a PowerPoint, because his father, turns out, Prince Philip, was actually one of the biggest devotees of UFO disclosure. Can you see me now, or are you still seeing my screen?
I can see you.
Okay, so I'm going to do another screen share here. A video, sure. Share screen, and when UFO. Okay, here we are. All right, so when Prince Philip died, can you see my screen now? Oh, okay. It came out that he was obsessed since he was young in UFO disclosure. And this RT piece of coverage from 2020, actually a few months before he died, made a point that who turned him onto this as a passion for his life. He even sponsored secret investigative committees. He had friends who were generals who he assigned in the 1950s to investigate UFO phenomenon. The person who put him onto this, who inspired him to this passion, which I have no doubt King Charles is also big into. Whether they actually believe it, I don't think they do, but I'll tell you why. Is this figure named Mountbatten, right? So it says Prince Philip obsessed with aliens and UFOs since Mountbatten revealed details of unexplained encounter. You know who they're referencing when they say Mountbatten?
Yeah, that's his dad, right?
It's his adopted uncle who.
He was like the head of India or something like that.
Yeah. He's the guy who oversaw the British partitioning up of India around ethno-nationalist divides around creating Pakistan, and then inducing Hindus to kill Sikhs and Hindus and Sikhs to kill Muslims, and vice versa, as the British are really good at doing. So that was Lord Mountbatten in 1946. He was also the Supreme Allied Commander of the Pacific Fleet during World War II, and the Chief of Defense of British Naval Intelligence. Lord Mountbatten made a point saying something very interesting. In 1950, recorded by his biographer, he made the point that the fact that they, and he's speaking now of these unidentified aerial phenomenon, The fact that they can hover and accelerate away from the Earth's gravity again and even revolve around a V-2 rocket in America, as reported by their head scientist, who, by the way, I don't know who which American head scientist he's referring to. I can't get that information so easily. Shows that they are far ahead of us. If they really came over in a big way, that might settle the capitalist-communist war. If the human race wishes to survive, they must band together. Okay, so Mountbatten is the guy who's I think he's the highest level official that I've seen so far, putting openly on the table the idea that not only does he deeply believe in extraterrestrial beings that have been circling our rockets and messing with us, but that this could provide the master key to solve the capitalist communist war that the British, that he was devoted to, had just begun artificially between the Soviet Union, China, and the Western free capitalist order, especially over the dead body of people like Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his allies, who were trying to create a very different system of win-win cooperation, as you and the viewers who have been watching this show, I'm sure, are very, very, very familiar. So this guy was a part of a high-level process to make sure the allies who were working together, destroying the British-funded, Wall Street-funded Hitler machine of Nazi fascism, became enemies instead of continuing to work with each other as we did to stop the Wall Street London fascist machine from being the driving force of a global one world government eugenics cult. Those allies by that I mean Russia, the USA, and China, who took on the majority of the weight to put that thing down, all of a sudden had to be induced to become each other's enemies. And at the same time, those enemies, the unreconstructed Nazis and fascists and like occult networks of the Nazi high command around Goering and the entire occult Thule Society network that was always there at the central command post of the Nazi structure, they had to be then absorbed by Allen Dulles, by the CIA, by MI6 into NATO secret armies that manage things like the entire machinery of NATO that we've talked about. And instead of doing something about that, because normally people would be very morally indignant to discover that such an injustice was underway, they were very, very distracted, let's just say that, not just with the periodic danger of having to do nuclear war drills, but also I think it was 1947, in the early March 1947, there began to be things seen in British skies and also in American skies, especially in New Mexico and around certain Air Force bases. People were looking out their windows, and all of a sudden, they started seeing a high density of unexplained phenomenon flying around that were not exactly plane-like. And that all of a sudden became picked up by the media, by newspapers, and a whole, as people are very aware of, watched the X-Files, a whole cultural pop propaganda matrix was built up around anecdotal evidence of people who did see things. They did definitely see things flying around. Not everybody was making that stuff up. Not everybody was high on drugs. They did, but there was a huge effort to repackage and redefine what visually people were seeing with a new folklore that made them very confused and not so inclined to pay attention to who was killing JFK. What was JFK doing when he was fighting this Nazi apparatus in America, when he was firing Allen Dulles and others? I'm going to say something quickly here, just because I just read the Lord Mountbatten quote. Something very useful here to keep in mind. Jake Sullivan recently gave, this is a 2019 interview that he gave with the China Project. And Jake Sullivan is today, as everyone knows, and was always working very closely with Biden in 2013, 2014, when he was also national security advisor, just like he is today. Before that, he was director of policy planning. He is a Rhodes Scholar. He is somebody who's worked closely with other Rhodes Scholars like Strobe Talbot. He's very deeply enmeshed in Russiagate to ensure that there would be no hope of a U.S.-Russia-China alliance around what Donald Trump was trying to do economically and politically to create some basis of cooperation with Eurasia. But he came out with this very interesting interview that has a little bit of an echo I found of Mountbatten, and it's a bit long, but it's so important that I want people to just like really think about this way of thinking. Because what's going on today? You know, we have the U.S. that is trying to use Taiwan as a proxy for a new Ukraine of the Pacific. We have a whole expansion of NATO and U.S. military industrial systems into the Pacific around China's perimeter. So all of these things are going on right now, and the American positive opinion of China is at historic lows, even lower than the worst days of the Cold War, where it's something like less than 13% of Americans have any positive feelings at this point towards China. And they're getting this from all directions. Whether you're liberal, whether you're Republican, you'll be given different stories about different ways China is evil, to induce you to basically go back into hyper Cold War McCarthy mode psychologically. Because guess what? Whether you're Canadian or American, you've been profiled psychologically, and what worked then in the 1950s works again today, and that's been used like a hypnotic charm. Even though anybody who scratched on half of the claims, or not half, any of the claims at this point, I would say, that are made about China or Russia infiltrating our democracies or drinking blood, as is actually being projected on Fox News right now, that these Chinese infiltrators are actually vampire blood drinkers out to work with Biden. That's what the Republicans are being sold on. And they
well that's what the China expert, what's his name, Gordon Chung, says that, man. We got to believe Gordon.
Yeah.
He's an expert. He's an expert.
People are willing to believe anything right now without any mental rigor. But this is why, again, we're going to read this thing by Sullivan and the interviewer. So
he looks terrible, by the way. He's lacking iron in his life. Maybe it's that old vegan diet he's on. It looks terrible.
Maybe it's too much actual blood drinking.
Maybe it's AIDS. It looks like
there's a little bit of projection there from these creeps.
Yeah, exactly.
So Sullivan said, the U.S. had a story, because he's talking about like the new type of narratives, the new great narratives that are needed to rally the people together. And he describes here the glory days of the Cold War, what we lost and what was so great about the Cold War. He said the U.S. had a story about America's role in the world through the Cold War that was based on a defined enemy and a defined mission. Since the end of the Cold War, that tank has run out of gas. We need a new story for people of the world, of the world, what it is, what we are all about. And I don't think we have done that yet. And the interviewer asks, is it possible to have a strategy that gets people to care but is not alarmist, idealistic to a fault, or the sort of red-blooded Jacksonian nationalism that could actually end up making situations around the world worse? Sullivan, I don't know. We don't actually have a successful example of this in our U.S. history. The two moments where the United States really rallied to internationalism were first in the era of Teddy Roosevelt, which was basically about jingoism and imperialism and so forth, which is basically when Teddy Roosevelt in the early 1900s, after the death of McKinley, turned the U.S. into an Anglo-American basket case and began to abuse the Philippines, Latin America, on behalf of private corporations and banks that began to get more control than our government, and used our government as a battering ram of empire, under the control of British High Command, because that was really the first integration of the U.S. and British programs into one new sort of Anglo-American basket that was then pushed back upon, but was revived. This is me, not Jake Sullivan, for those who might just be listening. This was later on revived over the dead body of Franklin Roosevelt 40 years later. But so Jake Sullivan is speaking about that one period when we were really embracing internationalism. But he's like, but there's a problem with that. It's a little jingoistic. And then he says the other kind. He said in the Cold War, when we had a great enemy, was the other time. But we had a great enemy, but we don't today because it's 2019. So he said, so it's either calling forth manifest destiny that is under the vision of Teddy Roosevelt, so that type of manifest destiny, and a kind of crudely racialized view of American superiority and American destiny, or it's an all-encompassing conflict against an ideological foe. He obviously prefers the second one by far. Those are the two examples that we have. So is there an alternative strategy? And part of the reason that people are so into the idea of turning China into that next great enemy, well, there is something in it for everyone, honestly. I mean, and it's like he's trying to sell this now. I mean, there is progressives who want to see much more domestic investment in the USA. So I think this is in the direction we are heading in, because there is something in it for everyone. But that very much concerns me. I would like to say that there is an alternative, which is much more focused on a set of threats and challenges that require the United States to rally the world a la Independence Day. The movie, you know, like aliens are coming. Yeah, right. So like I'm thinking, you know, he speaks like he's a Valley girl. Like, yeah, right. So like, yeah, I'm thinking, you know, if aliens come down, yeah, we'd rally the world, and that would really be a great story. And I think people would get totally psyched up for it to avoid. That's how I have to talk here. I realized. I think people would get totally psyched up for it to avoid global annihilation. So how do you do the same thing with a series of climate change, a series of issues that actually do represent genuine threats, but that are not really as poignant as aliens? Climate change, disease, the possibility of terrorists getting their hands on weapons of mass destruction, and marshal the resources of the globe to, you know, defend our way of life. But it's so abstract. No aliens. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer. And because I don't have a good answer, and I have not heard one from others, I think we're creeping towards turning China into that answer. And just saying, you know, he's really talking like this. What we are going to do to have an organizing principle for U.S. foreign policy, it's going to be China. So very clear, right? Oh, can you hear me? Am I still there? I hope I'm still there. V, are you there? Did I lose my internet connection? Okay, can I get some sign from anybody who might be listening? Okay, I've got comments here. Can people hear my voice right now? Can I get anybody in the chat to say if you can hear my voice? Ham Solo said 5 times 5. Good. Okay, good. So I guess V just had to step out. That's okay. All right. Present. Thank you. All right. Back to screen share. All right. Screen share. How did I do this window? Boom. All right. So we're back on track. So we got definitely the spirit of Mountbatten, Louis Mountbatten, the rampant pedophile, right? The guy who is part of like a leading figure within the rapacious pedophilia rings of the British High Command during his time when he had little Indian.
I'm back. Sorry about that. I had a knock on the door. I apologize.
Oh, not a worry at all. No, it's okay. The audience let me know that I could still be heard. So you got Lord Mountbatten, the pedophile, who's deeply enmeshed in this thing. And who else is this guy working with?
You're not talking about Old Dickie, are you?
Old Dickie.
That's his name. Old Dickie.
That's literally what he was called.
Philip's dad is Old Dickie.
Yes.
Right.
And we're going to say a bit more about Old Dickie, but let's just see who else, because Jake Sullivan has been working very closely with John Podesta, who's senior advisor to Biden on the clean energy transition. He was chief of staff of Bill Clinton, leading advisor to Hillary Clinton. John Podesta is also somebody who I only really kind of got a better appreciation for this freak when the whole pizza thing started coming around. I'm not going to say anything that could get this shut down from YouTube, but all that to say, there are some very nasty creatures and habits. Now, the thing about Podesta is that both he and Jake Sullivan were both very, very active throughout Russiagate. I've written a whole chapter in my book on this. And John Podesta is the promoter of Tom DeLonge and the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences. That's Tom DeLonge, the former singer of Blink-182. That's some other members of his advisory board. And I want to play here just quickly. I've played this once before about a year and a half ago, but I think since people have probably forgot it, it's worth doing once more. So here's a video of Tom DeLonge. You remember Tom DeLonge?
Blink. I'm not a fan of Blink-182, but I know the guy.
Well, Tom DeLonge.
Oh yeah, this guy. He was on Rogan several times. He's a kooky UFO nut.
Yes. And he found a new purpose to his life when his singing career went bust, and he basically I guess he just dried up. You know, these guys are.
Did it really happen when I myself I was like abducted, and I was anally probed, and then I knew that after the probing, that aliens were real.
Yeah. Or you were an MKUltra victim, one of the two. But definitely Tom DeLonge sees himself as a world's leading expert on UFOs, because he would always read UFO books when he was on music tours. And he's
that's what
describing
makes
here,
you an expert. I mean, I read Sasquatch books. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm an expert in Sasquatch.
Well, but that's the thing, right? We've all been profiled for our folklores. Like there's certain folklores that already existed in some form, and others that were created for us. And there's all over in Canada, there's a ton of Canadians who have been caught in the Sasquatch net. That's a real thing, where people devote like years of their lives to chasing down this species of 8-foot tall, hairy humanoid who has been living in the Colorado and Rocky Mountains and the boreal forests of Canada. And we always get teased by little grainy pictures or fuzzy with modern technology.
Matt,
you can't get anything.
Everybody's got an iPhone. Everybody has like a smartphone with a minimum 4K camera, and till this day, it's nothing but the grainiest of photos.
You know, I mean, it's unbelievable, but it really captures, because people need something to believe in that participates in the extravagant, and there's been a lot of work to create a climate of truth seeking, because a lot of people they sense that there's something wrong. They sense that their governments are lying to them, that there's something that is manipulating us as far as a conspiracy. But that noble natural impulse to see that there's something messed up with the big popular narrative that we're all expected to abide by, our minds will then naturally leap into asking questions. Well, what's behind it? So there's a lot of effort by those social engineers who created this mess to create little nets to stimulate us and to create little fetishes and obsessions, so that we don't actually devote our energy and time to figuring out who the hell killed JFK, what the hell took over the US, and how can we stop a new nuclear war from destroying the world today? But instead, people's energy is obviously absorbed by other considerations.
The real conspiracy is not about that. The real conspiracy is, what are the Greys really thinking about us? What galaxy are they from? And is Sasquatch a part of this alien takeover? That's the real thing, man. Like, how do we know if Joe Biden is like not really Joe Biden, but he's actually a Sasquatch in disguise, using some sort of holographic technology that the Greys developed for him? That's like the real conspiracy, Matthew. And I don't think you get that.
He's obviously a clone. The real Joe Biden was abducted in 2016. And this is a clone that was created on a spaceship, obviously. Or maybe a hologram, like the Queen was, as says David Icke.
You ever notice? If you notice, us folks in the West, we're so prone to like fantasy. A great portion of our population is prone to fantasy, prone to hyperbole, prone to like this wild stuff, man.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think this is why I want to play this little 2-minute clip of his investors video that he made, so that people will give money to it, where he goes through what his motives were as a creator, as an artist, to create To the Stars Academy in order to prepare the world for the release and disclosure of UFOs. So what happened? What's behind the blurring of fantasy and fiction in our age, that people can no longer differentiate so easily one from the other? So let's just listen to Tom DeLonge talk about his motives, his experience, who tapped him on the shoulder, and then we'll let me know if you see any anomalies, or people watching, you could write a little comment and let me know if there's any anomalies.
It's more like who popped him in the rear end is more appropriate here. But we'll continue.
Let me know if you could hear that. Can you hear the video?
I couldn't believe where I got, and I was like, okay, well, this is a great time to try and do something else.
Back in 2014, I started To the Stars, a media company that would develop science fiction-based films, books, TV shows, comics, all of it. But I really wanted to make this new project more ambitious, more impactful, and to have it make a lasting impression on people's lives. I recognized that there were people in government that wanted to engage the public on topics that unfortunately had a stigma, even though they were based in scientific fact. At the time, there was no mechanism for them to do this. Through a series of meetings, I was soon connected to a large group of U.S. government officials from the CIA, the Department of Defense, and Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. These guys were the ones involved in the secretive U.S. government programs that dealt with these subjects, and they have all taken tremendous risks to themselves and their reputations to do something that can benefit the world. They wanted to be a part of something special, to be a part of a company that could not only change the way we see ourselves, but also change the path humanity is on. We created a company called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. As a team, we synergistically united our strengths. With the entertainment division, we create worlds, science fiction stories that inspire and transcend. We are a publisher, a merchandiser, and a production studio. We have stories about dreams, consciousness, the paranormal, UFOs, and many other themes that once used to be taboo, but after newly declassified government documents, are now proving to be absolutely real. We even have our own reality series launching this year on the History Channel, a weekly 1-hour series on our company and all that we do. In the science division, we are building the world's first and only artificial intelligence database of unexplained events, deploying data collection teams internationally, and analyzing exotic materials originating from unidentified aerial phenomena. For the first time, these opportunities are real and have the potential to completely revolutionize the way we live. And here, for the first time in history, this group of spies, aerospace engineers, and secretive government officials have chosen to team up with an award-winning producer to change the status quo. We want to do something more than just tell a story this time. We want to be in the story and then bring it all to life. Educating the world, creating revolutionary technology, and telling the story of the millennia, and doing it all together. There's nothing bigger. To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science is where science fiction becomes reality. I wanted to make a quick message to let you know that from the heart, I left my band and all that I was known for because this is the moment in time where I can change the world for my kids and everybody else's.
What a loser.
I would love for you to consider doing that with us.
What a loser. What a loser. Oh my God. Scotty NYC said it best. Special psyops for special people. Hollywood and CIA love story. Scotty, well put, sir. Well put.
So let me ask you this. What did you see as being a bit anomalous?
The fact that you had everybody who's a deep state apparatchik coming out as this loving, we are for the people, we're about changing the course of humankind, we're about love and disclosure. I mean, my God, dude, where do you begin? Every single one of those characters are just some of the most terrible human beings of God's green earth.
Yes, that is
terrible.
True. And some of the bios of some of these creatures involve people who are like the former head of biological warfare division of the Pentagon, former deputy director of the CIA, former head of White House intelligence, like high level operatives who really just care so much about our right to know the truth and to love each other. What great noble people. Can you see my my PowerPoint again?
Oh yeah, let me bring it up.
Let me ask you this: Do you have to stop at 3:00 today, or can we go on a little bit longer?
No, we can go longer.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
So John Podesta, he's the guy who made sure that Hillary Clinton would make it part of her campaign platform in 2015 when she was running against Donald Trump to do full alien disclosure. There's a lot of video footage on different talk shows, Jimmy Kimmel, other places where she was saying like this is like a #1 thing. Also force people to know what's Area 51, tickling us with all of these promised goodies of classified truths, and really carrying on the mission of her husband. Because what was Bill doing? Bill was the first president, the first Rhodes Scholar president, and the first president ever who did a mass multi-million file declassification dump back in 1993. And I call it a dump for a reason, because people who got all excited began looking through this giant mountain of declassified photos and anecdotal evidence for people who reported what they saw to the authorities for 60 years of Cold War history. Found that, again, there's like the smoking guns they were all promised weren't there, but it gave people more passion because there's always more that's still classified. So John Podesta, who again himself began to go really heavy public on this in 2001, giving speeches. Again, people just have to Google or go to YouTube John Podesta UFOs, and you'll get hundreds of returns on that. They were all, Hillary, John Podesta, and Bill were all recruited to this cause officially in 1992. And the person, the old fart that we're all looking at there is the key figure in this. And this is a guy whose name is Lawrence Rockefeller. Rockefeller started a project after a whole lifetime of philanthropy, you know, working as part of the Trilateral Commission. He's the other brother of you have David Rockefeller, the founder of the Trilateral Commission, who took over the coup d'etat under the Trilats in 1971, 70 to 73, that really took over the dead bodies of Bobby Kennedy, JFK, Martin Luther King, and Henry Kissinger, George Shultz were playing a key role. Nelson Rockefeller is his other brother, who was another Trilateral Commission leader, who nearly became president, was vice president under Ford. There was a situation of a Manson family disciple who tried to shoot Gerald Ford and just missed. But had she been successful, then you would have had a Nelson Rockefeller president back in the 70s. The other brother is Stephen Rockefeller, who was assigned the role of chartering with Maurice Strong the Earth Charter, part of the UN Sustainable Development Millennial Goals. But not just that, it's like the upgrade, the replacement of the nation state with the idea of a new system of law that replaces the UN Charter. The UN Charter is, of course, in their minds, too favorable to the existence of sovereign nation states. And the idea that no government should go to war with another government for aggressive reasons, that has no place in the enlightened age of humanitarian wars that have to, be brought online. So the Earth Charter was created to create a one world unipolar center of command. And Stephen Rockefeller in 1994, with, again, Mikhail Gorbachev, who had been also the president of, the head of Russia, who was basically dismantling Russia and opening up the door for the CIA and Soros to come in and take control, which is what happened in the 90s. They're all working together to reset civilization politically, economically, culturally. But what's Lawrence Rockefeller going to do? The fourth grandson of John D. Rockefeller of Standard Oil, who was behind, lest we forget, the growth of Nazism and continue to fund and provide petroleum to the entire Nazi machine throughout the entirety of World War II, including Operation Barbarossa, right, which was made possible by the Rockefeller machine. And had that been a success, as was planned, then Russia would have ceased to exist already 80 years ago. So all that to say, what's Lawrence Rockefeller going to do? Well, he goes from becoming one of the world's biggest patrons of the green movement, as well as psychedelic research, funding people like Terence McKenna, whose career is bankrolled by this guy, including other people like Barbara Marx Hubbard, bankrolled career, big new age guru, all of this stuff. But he goes from that in 1992 to his new mission, which is now to fund or to create something known as the Disclosure Project. And the Disclosure, he brings Hillary Clinton, Bill to his ranch. They spend weeks there. John Podesta is there. They're all, and the idea is to unify the different UFO truth groups under a new centralized umbrella organization. That's the Disclosure Project. And I don't have a picture of Greer. Damn. Okay. One of the early recruits he hires to this project is Stephen Greer, who became sort of the spokesman for the operation for the next 30 years. He's often on Joe Rogan, or even Redacted is getting this creepy bodybuilder, former military physician on their program. That's a problem. But anyway, you have this whole thing which becomes hugely influential, especially in the alternative media community, where people who are already looking at the conspiracies, secret societies, are all of a sudden given a new piece of the puzzle around which they're supposed to, as metadata, fit everything into, which is that, yes, these secret societies and yes, these conspiracies have been manipulating us, but now the causal agency is not human, not anything tied to the Babylonian cults or the inbred family caste structures that have been maintaining a sociopathic system of cults and occult, occult intelligence organizations over centuries and centuries, people lose sight of that, and it all becomes aliens have been giving us tech and giving the elites the tools that the elite needs to bring us to some ordained conclusion. Which means if you have an intergalactic species of aliens interfacing with the most evil people of the world, well, then what does that say that our ability to fight this is? How can you get a Martin Luther King type of identity to problem solve if you're dealing with effectively the power of gods, right? Whether from this dimension or there's some spins that involve integrating with or interfacing with the aliens using LSD or psilocybines or DMT or other forms of mind-altering, mind-expanding drugs. There's different things. And if we go to Brad and Sherry Steiger, who wrote a book called Conspiracies and Secret Societies, they did a pretty good little coverage of Lawrence Rockefeller. And one thing here that's useful is they make a point that they say, and this is a quote from their book, Lawrence also funded the Green Earth Foundation, headed by Terence McKenna, who traveled the globe on the Rockefeller dime, collecting psychoactive plants, which he was permitted to cultivate in Hawaii. McKenna theorized that Aboriginal cultures have used these substances to induce a psychic link with extraterrestrials, which is, again, a big thing that Graham Hancock is promoting. Netflix is promoting these types of reinterpretations of ancient, forbidden archaeology, ancient history, as though the Mayans and the Egyptians and the other early civilizations were getting their tech from aliens from another dimension that they could access these other 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th higher dimensions that mathematical quantum mechanics demands exists because, the math says it must, though it's experimentally unverifiable, sorry. But that's how we've been interfacing, they say. That's how to account for Jesus, Muhammad, or any of the miracles we're told in our old organizing stories, is by aliens that gave us these abilities from other dimensions through drugs. So we're all being initiated into it's a new global initiation that we're being put through, just to be clear on this, to detooth Christianity and Judeo-Christian and Islam and all of the traditional religious systems that had imbued deep belief in morality of truth. That has to be undone. So the other thing that's worth also now keeping in mind, we brought Lord Louis Mountbatten, British High Command. We've got billionaires around the Rockefeller complex that was funding fascism, that's promoting UFO truth. And we also have drugs and ecologism, right? That are also themes that we're seeing again and again repeated. John Podesta is the senior advisor to the clean energy transition under Biden, right? So what's a good starting point to think about this as a cult? Because some people could say, oh, there was once in the 50s and 60s an authentic UFO truth group or truth movement, and the government is actually covering up Roswell, aliens, other things, and it's been subverted. That's what some people would say. It's been subverted by bad actors of the intelligence, pedophilia, and billionaire class. But it's really still a good thing, but that's been subverted, you see. So let's ask that question. Is it true that there was ever an example of a time when there was an authentic UFO truth movement? And so let's go back now, holding what we just kept in what we've been introduced to an observation made in the shock doctrine. Otherwise, I don't like Naomi Klein, but in her early chapters, she says something good. Says that describing Sir Henry Tizard, who worked very closely with Lord Louis Mountbatten, he was the chief scientist of Britain, the Churchill's chief science advisor, the head of the UK Ministry of Defense, and especially the Air Force. He's the guy who brought online microwave radar. And he's also the guy who brought the Tizard mission to the United States in 1940 to integrate, to help the Americans integrate their intelligence, private sector, military companies with the government in a very compartmentalized way. And that involved also giving some tech over, but also stealing tech from the Americans for the sake of the British and trying to get the Americans to join in a certain type of way into World War II. So Sir Henry Tizard, she talks about, she says one of the most controversial meetings that he had to attend in his capacity as chair of the National Research Commission would only emerge many years later with the declassification of CIA documents, namely a meeting on June 1st, 1951, at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Montreal, Canada, between Tizard, Oman Salant, that is chairman of the Defense Research and Development of Canada later on, and representatives of the CIA to discuss brainwashing. So this meeting is essentially the initiatory meeting of what becomes MKUltra, overseen by Sir Henry Tizard. Oman Salant becomes one of the Canadian sociopaths who goes on to co-found with Pierre Elliott Trudeau a little bit later on the Club of Rome of Canada. Maury Strong plays a big role in the creation of that cult. Not only are they creating brainwashing and figuring out how are they going to fund new types of techniques to bring drugs that were once used by the mystery religions of the cult of Eleusis in Greece in ancient times, or Delphi in the Delphic Oracle at the Delphi of Apollo. How are they, which all required certain types of hallucinogenic material to have the initiatory processes into the higher mysteries of the occult secret societies. That was part of how the whole satanic structure of evil of the ancient times was maintained, was through thousands of little branches of these cults, both for the masses but also for the elites and the elites of the elites. Albert Hoffman, who becomes he's a doctor who works for the CIA during MKUltra, is the guy who discovers LSD-25 using the plant blight recipes of ancient times. The development of psilocybines, looking at different native cultures and their rituals, and discovering that there's certain types of mushrooms that can also create a psychedelic effect. These are all parts of what are explored by people like Sidney Gottlieb, who oversees this project with Henry A. Murray at Harvard called the Harvard Psilocybin Project, that starts experimenting on their students, including Ted Kaczynski, who becomes the Unabomber, being one of these early guinea pigs. But they're experimenting on an entire generation of baby boomers. Everybody born between 1945 and 1960 becomes effectively a guinea pig of this MI6 CIA mind control psyop. And Henry Tizard is a part of this, is the guy who launches this, I should say. Sir Henry Tizard is also the chairman of defense. So like I said, chairman of the Defense Research Policy Committee of the UK, foreign secretary to the British Royal Society. He's working very closely with Lord Lothian, the British ambassador to America during World War II. He's working out of his office. So that's a roundtable Cecil Rhodes high up controller. And the thing that makes him more important to our current story is that he's the head of the UK Ministry of Defense Flying Saucer Working Group, which is the biggest government-funded flying saucer working group up until that time, which he does on the initiative of Lord Louis Mountbatten, who encourages him to do it. So that's actually in a biography of Tizard online. It's admitted that this is so. Now, there's a rogues gallery I just want to introduce quickly that JFK goes to war with. I mentioned that everyone generally knows that he fired Allen Dulles, but he didn't just fire Allen Dulles in 1961 for what Dulles was doing behind his back with the Bay of Pigs and trying to kill Castro and a lot of other things. The murder of Lumumba was a part of that. But Dulles was also fired with Richard Bissell, who is a high-level CIA operative with the Office of Policy Coordination. He was also the head of Area 51 that was set up after World War II to test out certain types of new tech that was gotten from Nazi aeronautic scientists, involving flying saucer technology of a variety of designs. Other types of drone technology were explored at Area 51 specifically, but there were a few other zones, all under very high classification, high levels of secrecy, and many of the people, even people working within the military, pilots, were looking out of their windows, not understanding what they were seeing and reporting it back to the authorities. And so something had to be told to them to repackage, to give them an answer. And so these people were very happy to provide some sort of a creative solution. A couple of other figures from the same CIA Office of Policy Coordination, which is the psychological warfare branch of the CIA. That's the mind wars branch of the CIA. involved members like Joseph Bryan III. He is an OPC director. Roscoe Hillenkoetter, who's a CIA director from 47 to 50. They're going to play very important roles. But now, Bissell was fired. Alan Dulles was fired. General Charles Cabell was also fired the same day by John F. Kennedy, all three of whom played a key role in the Bay of Pigs fiasco. I don't care what people have said that they've heard or read about JFK being the one who is to blame for the Bay of Pigs. They have been lied to. My wife did a whole chapter on this. There's been books written about this that have proven the case is in my mind, absolutely closed. JFK was lied to. He didn't even know about this damn thing. It was initiated by Eisenhower on his last days by both Dulles brothers, who put the ball into motion. And the idea was to do what's called executive action. The idea was the CIA would now be in charge of a new type of shadow, an independent apparatus tied to the Pentagon and especially the Air Force that would then carry out murders of leaders of governments that were troublesome to the agenda of the oligarchy. Arbenz of Guatemala was targeted early on. Now, Arbenz, in the original 1954 planning from the CIA, all of these figures drafted different programs to overthrow Arbenz and bring in because Arbenz was nationalizing United Fruit. He was reorganizing the corrupt system of Wall Street puppets inside of Guatemala. One of the declassified policy documents that was declassified in 2019 pointed out that one of the scenarios being advanced was, if possible, in number C, if possible, fabricate a big human interest story like flying saucers in a remote area to take the play away. So to distract people with some flying saucer imagery, and then that way they won't notice that the U.S. government is killing their leader and installing a puppet. They did the same thing then to, the idea was in the Philippines, carry out these operations, do it to Vietnam, do it to any government. Lumumba got killed by this operation. Lumumba, who JFK was supposed to meet within a week before Lumumba was murdered. So JFK fires Charles Cabell, who was the deputy director of the CIA from 53 to 62. And the thing that makes Cabell also interesting is that he was the creator of what's called Project Blue Book. 1952, it was launched. He launched it. And this is the biggest U.S. government project to investigate reports on flying saucer technology and generate reports on whether or not it's from this Earth or from off the Earth, always with ambiguous reports that were made public. But now, Charles Cabell, this whole Project Blue Book was actually modeled on what Sir Henry Tizard was doing with the British Flying Saucer Working Group earlier. So that was done and replicated in America. There were two smaller ones before that, Project Grudge and Project Sign, but nothing was as big as Project Blue Book. And of course, this then is designed to create a sphere of curiosity and a sense that something is secret and always ambiguous. But one of the things also is that's interesting is that of these, despite the fact that it's always kept ambiguous, oops, when I have it here, oh, I erased my slide, damn. But despite that, the director of the CIA is openly going to things like Time Magazine, giving interviews in 1952, and people can read this. Henry Luce, right? The drug promoting, LSD promoting owner of Time Magazine and a devout fascist who put Hitler and Mussolini on his Man of the Year. He made sure that Time Magazine, which hid the Zapruder film, that Time Magazine that kept for 5 years the Zapruder film that proved JFK was shot from the front in a vault. He oversees and ensures that the head of the U.S. Air Force gives it an official interview to Time Magazine describing how, yes, there are these UFOs. Yes, we've caught some. And yes, the technology must have existed by an intelligent species, not from the Earth. So on the one hand, you've got people from the U.S. government saying there's nothing to see here. On the other hand, they're going out and teasing people saying, oh, yeah, we don't know exactly what it is, but it's definitely from intelligent beings, and it's certainly not from the Earth. So they're fucking with people's heads. The other thing here is Edward Lansdale, who's a real jarhead psychopath, pioneered covert operations. He's known as the father of American covert operations in Asian countries specifically, and he did things like, for example, he subverted the Hukbalahap rebellion in the Philippines by profiling the stories, the folklore, where there was a story of vampires called aswangs, believed by the village people to be blood-sucking demons. And what he did with his team in the Philippines was they basically kidnapped and tortured people, drained them of blood, and hung them up on trees all over the jungles of the Philippines, so that the militia fighters who were against the U.S. colonialists would freak out, and they did, and then like ran away and gave up their fight to defend their country from the American military, which worked so well that he was sent off to by Dulles to go to Vietnam to do it all over again there. And he began by training the French to do it in their battle with the Indo-Chinese, and then he carried this out throughout.
That's what normal human beings do, Matt. I don't know about you, but a real honorary soldier, somebody who's all about fighting for freedom and the American way and God and country. I mean, what you want to do is once you grab your enemy in violation of all humanity and the Geneva War Conventions, is to slit their throat and their major arteries, drain their body completely of blood, and then hang them upside down on a coconut tree. That makes total sense. It's a very humane way to die. Maybe it was a halal way to die. Maybe it's a kosher way to end your opponent rather than shooting them. Is to drain them of blood.
It might have been. He might have hired an imam and a rabbi to walk
and
around
a rabbi together. Maybe what we didn't realize is they were working together on peace between the Mindanao, government and whatnot. The Muslims in the Mindanao and the Christians and maybe some Jews over there as well. We're just trying to create peace.
Maybe that could be. Who knows, right? So let's assume that that's not true. But one thing that's very interesting there is that he was involved also with the overthrow of Castro and the Bay of Pigs. And the scenario that he put forth was part of what's called Operation Mongoose. And as this is from a quote by Edward Lansdale himself, for elimination through illumination. That was what he called his project, elimination. So using high intensity lights that could then project light imagery over Cuba. He says that I thought that the people of Cuba could be convinced through rumors that the second coming was at hand, if only the satanic Castro were overthrown. So think now today where, there's some images that people that you can watch on YouTube of modern holographic technology and how advanced this holographic technology is to make it seem like whales are like swimming in the sky, giant, and it looks like they're actually solid objects. It's quite advanced, but they were already thinking in these terms a long time ago. People like Charles Minot, a Quebec investigator in the 90s, did a lot of work on this and identified this as something called Project Bluebeam, to convince people that there were beings from another dimension or the other galaxy, or if it's a Catholic or religious community of victims who are supposed to see this, it might be like an image of the Christ making a comeback, whatever, and then repackage these new miraculous visions from people as a new priesthood for a new set of revamped religious stories. Project Rand in 1950 also did a whole thing. I'll just read the first half where they said what types of superstitious. They did this for the Air Force, right? The same Air Force that's like in charge now of this whole operation. But Rand Corps is writing, well, what kind of superstitious appeals will be best adapted to the various audiences to be propagandized? A study of local superstitions as related to popular folklore might be profitable in providing answers to these questions. It seems likely that superstitions flourish in an atmosphere of tension and insecurity. I won't read the whole thing, but I have the PDF if anybody emails me and wants to read it. They don't explicitly say UFOs, but it's clear looking at what's going on that this is part of what's being created are UFO myths for people. Now, I brought up earlier two people I didn't talk about in my rogues gallery that I'm going to just say a little word about. Joseph Bryan III, this guy with his Freemasonic gear, Grand Master in Maryland Freemason, and Roscoe Hillenkoetter, the CIA director. These two guys go on and found the America's largest civilian UFO truth group in the early 50s called the National Investigative Committee on Aerial Phenomenon. And I'm doing this just to ask, like, is there any evidence that there was ever an authentic UFO truth group movement that was not controlled by sociopathic intelligence agencies? Is there ever such an a moment that has existed? Sunday Star, August 6, 1966, August 7th, has an article called Flying Saucers Again, Do You Believe in Them? This is a quote directly from this article. The UFO investigator, the stated position of one of the most highly qualified members of its board of governors, that's of this group I just mentioned here, National Investigative Committee on Aerial Phenomenon. Joseph Bryan III, Colonel, U.S. Air Force, retired former special assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force and former member of the staff of General Lars Norstad, then Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, said, quote, "It is my opinion that the UFOs reported by competent observers are devices under intelligent control, that their speeds, maneuvers, and other technical evidence prove them superior to any aircraft or space devices now produced on the Earth, and that these UFOs are interplanetary devices systematically observing the Earth, either manned or unmanned or under remote control or both." So, all right. This guy, big truth seeker, Joseph Bryan III, Office of Policy Coordination, Psychological Warfare branch of the CIA, becomes like the leading rep of this organization, who's come out telling the American people and the world people of the truth of what's being kept from them. I know we've just run out of time, so I'm not going to go through this, but all that to say, when people say, but were we not watching things? Were there things not being seen in the skies of New Mexico and around Area 51? Yes, there were. Yes, there were. But again, to know what those things were, you have to look at what the Horton brothers, these two guys, were developing as part of one of the 3 flying saucer projects being developed by the Nazis to use implosion technology systems in order to induce electrical currents. It's a different paradigm of science, but it's still scientifically grounded. It's not like aliens are giving us this tech. It's something that has a precedent in a tradition of German research going back to the days of Kepler and his magnetic harmonic theory, and that of the planetary motions around the sun, and a whole tradition that has been blocked from our Western education system of science. But the type of implosion technology that people like Victor Schauberger were developing using conical flow, spiral flows of cold water being sucked instead of pushed, inducing currents that are then tied to sort of proto anti-gravity systems that allow some of these prototypes that have been declassified. I mean, a lot of the material was put under deep classification, but we've seen some of the blueprints circulate. We've seen people like Victor Schauberger remark on this, and his son remark and talk about this technology that involved large prototypes that were upwards, as the reports I've seen, upwards of 40 meters in length in some cases, that could go upwards of 40,000 meters in the air, moving very fast. I mean, we're talking several times faster than the speed of sound, far before the time that the hypersonic jets were being developed. So you have all of these things being put under a veil of secrecy. You have other types of drone tech also put under a veil of secrecy. People without security clearance, even in the military, in NASA, don't know what the hell is going on. And there's an effort to do exactly what Schiller describes in The Ghost Seer, the short story that Schiller wrote in the 1790s, that I highly suggest
great book.
This.
That's a great book.
It's really good. It's so sharp. And it Schiller's just laying out how does Venetian intelligence actually use their techniques to depattern people's minds and reconstruct them to become tools of the very empire that gets sucked into their games, and the fact, again, the fact that all of these groups were behind the growth and promotion of LSD, of psilocybins, of the whole drug culture, and that our spirituality is now going to be accessed through drugs instead of through loving God, loving our fellow man, loving ourselves, doing good works, fighting empire, alleviating and helping the poor. All of these things became reduced in influence, in value, in favor of people seeking a spiritual experience. through various types of drugs that were then associated with a new way of looking at the world, looking at your past, looking at geometry, looking at science through the filter of mathematical quantum mechanics. The idea that there is no truth, according to the Niels Bohr, Max Heisenberg, Wolfgang Pauli school of quantum mechanics. This whole school took the real discoveries that were being made, as we talked about last week, by people like Max Planck, Madame Curie, and they were making, these people were real scientists of the true, Platonic humanist tradition, making discoveries into God's creation that were giving humanity a greater power of over creation by our knowledge and obedience to those discovered laws, and opening up the door to the quantum domain. And then this whole school of the Copenhagen school emerged, especially through the Solvay conference, funded by often the Rockefeller Foundation machine, that was also funding eugenics, which is another statistical science, saying that the only way that we could know what's going on in the atomic domain is through random statistical probability theory functions, which is like a science of maybes. It's a science of gambling. And with that, you could build whatever model is logically consistent with itself that could justify why there's 7 dimensions, 8, 20, 35 dimensions, whatever. And then that then creates an entire space in respected peer-reviewed scientific journals and magazines that justify that, well, maybe we can also tap into these other domains, not through our reason that God gave us, but rather through dipping into psychedelics and going into some sort of a trance-like state, and then interfacing with shadowy beings, not from our subconscious, but really from these other dimensions that can then give us powers or technology or whatever. And maybe that's what Jesus Christ was. Maybe Jesus Christ, as you know, is being popularized by Graham Hancock and others, maybe he was just an initiate of the Eleusinian mysteries, and that's how he was able to recruit so many followers, was by giving them drugs. So
Yeah,
they would also have spiritual.
I know something was up with those, 3 fish and 5 loaves.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's insane, bro. It's insane. And these are all things that were just sitting under our noses, and they're, they've completely squelched all this technology, everything that could advance humanity and civilization forward. These people are truly evil. There's no other words to describe it.
And they were all the same people who oversaw the murder of JFK. That's the other thing. I really want to get that across.
Yeah.
All these
but we should trust them because they want to steer humanity in the right direction, Matthew.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Matt, thank you so much for being on. We really appreciate it. Folks, again, you can find him over at the CanadianPatriot.org, RisingTideFoundation.net, and make sure you purchase his books. Absolute brain trust. With that being said, we're at the end of the show. Thank you all for watching. Cheers.